According to Peter Wybrow, having a variety of perspectives leads us to be able to take action on a larger spectrum of ideas. Therefore, having a diverse range of perspectives is imperative as we gather to make connections and strengthen relationships to move forward as a society. I will be exploring the book Intimacy or Integrity, Philosophy and Cultural Difference by Thomas P. Kazoulis. Instead of digging deep into specific cultural differences, he narrows down two different ways of interpreting relationships, intimacy and integrity, and applies their ideals to the very foundation of diverse cultural orientations. While discussing main points, I will also reflect on how concepts presented in this book reframe my thinking around partnerships and diversity, and how this also applies to myself as a leader in diverse settings. Kazoulis begins with a story from his past while living in Japan. An American couple and their little girl entered a store. A Japanese man was happily interacting with the girl while her parents shopped. She continuously pointed to the watch he was wearing, and he gave her the watch to look at. Eventually, she ended up tossing the watch, where it then broke. The Japanese man demanded an apology from the couple and expected them to pay for the damage. The couple did not see why they needed to apologize or how they were even responsible, since the man gave the little girl the watch, and little kids tend to break stuff. The assumption of the Japanese man was if they had been good parents, the child would have known it was wrong to throw the watch. Who was right and who was wrong? What was interesting to Kazoulis was, upon intervening, he realized both sides had the same story. It was not a matter of linguistic misunderstanding, rather a difference in opinions on child rearing. In this case, it seemed no one was right or wrong, but there certainly were problems on both sides with being able to understand each other's views. Culture is not limited to nations, but also subcultures within national cultures and subcultures across national cultures, and even deeper still in relation to gender, class, and ethnicity, and so on. Some call for some basic universalization across cultures as a way to agree on at least some ideals, such as what are considered basic human rights. Others rightfully believe this will threaten meaningful cultural differences and diversity. Cooperation should arise from some community of conversation in which people of different worldviews strive together for common goals. How do we come together for such a great feat? Well, we have to understand each other. Kazoulis uses a variety of visuals throughout the book to explain his analysis. His first are figures of trees. Far away, these trees are different. Next visual, he shows the close-up of the two trees. Now, it is so zoomed in, it's difficult to see how the two trees are even the same. Finally, we see similarities and patterns emerge. In the study of cultures and subcultures, Kazoulis explores how intimacy and integrity explain the patterns. The purpose of the book is to see connections and differences we may have otherwise missed through communication, and how this will help us understand differences across cultures. Although Kazoulis refers often to differences in Western and Eastern cultures, he makes it clear this book is not exclusively a way to explore one specific culture against another. The philosophy of why people believe and how they interpret situations is much deeper. The diagrams of the trees impacted my thinking by showing how individuals have a tendency to both overlook differences and also fail to recognize how differences may come from similar backgrounds. It seems we have neglected to create foundational systems which would allow individuals to make meaningful connections. In bridging differences for better mentoring, they bring attention to the idea of finding common ground. Finding commonalities is often the first step, but in doing so, we inadvertently cause something called groupthink, alienating those who may not share the group's similarities. This means outsiders feel undervalued and are less likely to share new ideas and opinions. But if we focus on differences, this can lead to judgments and fragmentations. The idea is not to accentuate, avoid, or judge the ways we are different from one another, but to honor those differences by balancing commonalities and differences. Moving forward with Kazoulis, this theme presents time and time again. Intimacy and integrity are explored individually at first for clarification. When scenarios are presented, it becomes clear these two concepts are essential in interpreting different viewpoints. When thinking about partnerships with diversity, more often than not, different viewpoints lead to conflicting values. perhaps differences don't need to end in conflict, but rather they can end in mutual understanding. So what is cultural difference? It is what our traditions emphasize, enhance, and preserve as central. What Kazoulis realized as he began exploring the difference between Western and Eastern cultures is they're not thinking differently, we're just not thinking about the same thing. Such as these types of pictures called gestants. Often we tend to see one version easier than the other. When we realize there is another way to interpret the picture, we can usually move back and forth between the two images with ease. Relating to cultures, one may have focused on certain beliefs and values more than others representing one viewpoint. When we can see how other beliefs and values can be equally recognized, it's easier to see the other version of reality. Another illustration shows two examples of how to represent a two-dimensional cube. The first figure is how we have been generally taught to represent a cube, even though the other figure shows the exact same thing. The version we were taught comes more naturally. Some cultures place an emphasis on intimacy, some on integrity. Kazoulis defines 5 fundamental characteristics of each, elaborating on their differences. To say we have an intimate knowledge of a subject means we have spent a lot of time getting to know and understand the subject itself. Using a gymnastics judge as an example, all judges understand the intricate moves and logistics of maneuvers, but it takes experience to judge the style. Looking at a panel of judges, usually their scores are reliable because everyone has that expertise. However, someone in the audience who does not have the same experience may not fully comprehend where the scores are coming from because they do not have the same intimate knowledge. Intimacy is objective in a personal way because the individual constructs facts and opinions based off individual circumstances, not subjectively as it can be viewed individually, but objectively in the sense that others with similar intimate knowledge have similar viewpoints. Integrity, in contrast, emphasizes knowledge based on empirical observation and logical reasoning. Science is a great example. If a scientific fact is known to be true, it's because the experiments are replicable. Someone else should be able to do the same experiment under the same conditions to come to the same results. The results themselves should be consistent. Evidence has its own integrity. It does not change. Integrity is truly objective as it has specific answers. Additionally, all this information needs to be publicly verifiable. Everyone must have access to knowledge. Therefore, integrity is considered impersonal. My intimate relations are more than connections I have made. They are actually a part of what I am or have become. It is here we first begin to understand how relationships play into all of this. There are 2 types of relationships, external and internal. In an external relationship, the 2 things being related are separate ideas, and an internal relationship shows how the relationship becomes a part of the 2 things. Integrity stands alone, aligning with the external relationship. Kazoulis more easily explains the difference at the relationship's dissolution. When an intimate relationship breaks down, pieces of each side break down with it. In a relationship based on integrity, neither party loses anything. They maintain their integrity. Marriage could represent both. Integrity would refer more to the law, where if a marriage breaks down, each side can walk away with what they are entitled to based off the law. With an intimacy lens, the relationship itself has been built up over time, and when the marriage is no more, each certainly loses a bit of themselves. Returning to the concept of marriage as an intimate orientation, empathy becomes important for connections. Being able to understand what makes another person tick, and in turn what the other person knows, enhances a relationship in a way that cannot be measured. Feelings are developed through these connections and lost in the breakdown. That knowledge of the other person takes time and experience to develop, just like the gymnastics judge's knowledge of the sport. To build that relationship back with another person will take time and experience too, and that knowledge is not something that can be replicated on paper. Integrity, on the other hand, is purely intellectual knowledge. Hunches and intuition exist, but then must be backed up through evidence and publicly identifiable information. In fact, bringing feelings into such an orientation will only be confusing, because individuals experience emotions differently and therefore cannot be trusted. Kazoulis illustrates this dynamic through an expert with an axe. In an intimate relationship, someone who knows how to use an axe knows how to use it because of lots of practice and experience with a guide, a master. Through praxis, the axe user understands how to hold the axe handle, where to exert force, when to let the axe guide, and so on. The body begins to know these movements over time, and things become second nature. In an integrity orientation, the hows and whys are based on principles and verifiable through public test. Someone with the right intellect and knowledge can explain how to use the axe and show evidence and reasoning for the information. In intimate relationships, the axe user must engage in the praxis and find out for yourself. This is not saying Kazoulis interprets intimacy itself as being dark in a negative sense. Thinking about relationships between a sports player and their sport, if the player makes a move and someone asks why they did it, they may not be able to verbally conceptualize why they did what they did. Over the years, they have played the game so often that they subconsciously do things out of habit and intuition. The individual themselves may not know why they know. Integrity is the exact opposite because it's publicly verifiable and the hows and whys are clear and in the open. There is no second thought because it is fact. Knowledge is outlined in a way where everyone and anyone can duplicate or simply understand. Differences are in the foundation, but are not different like wood and metal, where the properties of each may be right or wrong depending on the context. It's more like the illustration of the cube. There is more than one way to represent the cube, neither being particularly right or wrong, and both consider the same reality. Using this knowledge as a reflective tool, we can begin to look at the foundations of culture in the workplace when we are considering differences in perspective. Much like critical race theory looks at laws in the United States, we can use knowledge of intimacy and integrity orientations and cultural expectations and practices, and its relation to traditional values. After defining the contrasting ideas of intimacy and integrity, Kazoulis begins to break down worldviews from a philosophical standpoint. Although highly simplified in contrast to his explanations, he relates both orientations to computer operating systems. Macintosh and Microsoft, as an example, are familiar systems which perform similar tasks. Like the trees, a computer begins its boot up to a point where everything is the same, until it needs to perform its first task. And that's where the operating systems come into play. Both open, and you are presented with ways to write a paper or search the internet. However, not all applications on both systems are able to communicate effectively with one another. When I receive a text from an Apple phone to my Android, error messages may appear from symbols which my system cannot comprehend from theirs. Through thorough yet abstract discussions, Kazoulis breaks down the differences, which include the philosophical study of knowledge. Integrity requires publicly verifiable objectivity, while intimacy is knowledge limited to an intimate circle of experts. In terms of metaphysics, essentially it's integrity as bipolarity, while intimacy's opposites refer more to the yin-yang model. And politically, integrity places emphasis on individual rights and responsibilities, while intimacy places emphasis on individuals as part of being a larger group. What I found interesting about this breakdown is how even though there are clear, definable differences, I find myself back and forth across models. I found it challenging to get a solid grasp on the areas of epistemology and metaphysics, but could align clear with ideas related to ethics and politics. I attended a conference recently on the whole family approach to jobs. During a panel discussion, Elizabeth Neptune, who provides technical assistance to Native American tribes, asked the group to raise their hand if they identified as a Native American. Not one hand went up. She shared this was the third convening she had attended where she was the only Native American representative. How, she wondered, could Native Americans have a voice when they are not at the table? Concerning ethical considerations between integrity and intimacy, has our society focused so much on maintaining Native Americans' cultural identity that they have become so separate as to not be part of the discussions? Or has society created such an intimate relationship where they have been assimilated into the mainstream, overlapping with cultures to the point of not being recognized for groups of cultures they individually represent? It seems either one extreme or the other certainly does not meet the needs of the Native American populations. Kazoulis believes the integrity orientation is theoretically more tolerant of diversity because its respect for autonomy and the individual. The assumption is that people can get at truth best if they look at things from a variety of viewpoints. He follows by acknowledging that a society can fail miserably at ideals which work towards social justice, but at least individuals have a platform to come forward, argue, and cooperate. The dark side would be because of the same freedoms, the danger of anarchy may be present as numerous radical groups branch off, psychologically and socially disconnected, where one feels little restraint when it comes to breaking away from everyone else. The intimacy orientation has its own ups and downs. In a positive sense, there is harmony among others and interconnectedness with the natural world. There is a strong safety net both emotionally and socioeconomically. There is little confrontation because everyone knows each other so well on various topics without having opinions explicitly voiced. Intimacy can also be seen negatively when it comes to criticism. As an insider, to criticize would be considered betrayal, and they could be ostracized. Since intimacy requires internal connections, this ostracization can literally take a piece of the person, which may lead to individuals simply conceding to the majority beliefs for fear of exclusion. We have to find a middle ground. Although Kazoulis agrees we use both the orientations, how do we really know which one to use in certain circumstances? Who gets to make that decision? As a leader, I recognize how I may contribute positively to such a dilemma. Towards the beginning of the book, it's discussed how cultural beliefs and values are passed down. It is those who are most persuasive with such beliefs and values that rise to positions of leadership, and in turn those leaders solidify those beliefs and values in what they do, strengthening them in the cultural context. Can demonstrate intimacy and integrity in areas not previously recognized, such as those from historically non-dominant cultures in the society, including people of color and those with varied sexual orientations. We do have the power to open our own eyes and understand all points of view, which will improve the well-being of citizens, especially in these marginalized categories. I believe we can create a more intimate culture and define a more advantageous integrity.